I always believed that the quiet rhythm of our life was built on trust and the familiar cadence of shared routines. My husband, Andrew, had a way of disappearing on business trips that, at first, I accepted as part of his job: long hours, client meetings in distant cities, and the occasional late-night flight home that I barely noticed because I was content in the warm embrace of our quiet domesticity. But as the years passed, subtle hints began to emerge that the trips were not merely about work. It started with the small, almost imperceptible details: the way his eyes would light up at the mention of certain cities, the lingering phone calls that lasted far longer than a standard conference call, and the secretive glances he exchanged with someone I never saw. I dismissed these early on as coincidences or my own overactive imagination, a trick of the light, perhaps, or the byproduct of my own insecurities. I never imagined that those business trips would morph into something far more complicated and painful, a reality that would upend everything I believed about love, loyalty, and the sanctity of our marriage. My story began in a time when Andrew and I were the picture of young love. We met in college and quickly became inseparable, our days a whirlwind of shared dreams, long conversations under starry skies, and promises made in the quiet intimacy of whispered secrets. Even then, there was a part of me that envied his ability to be so effortlessly charming and persuasive, a trait that seemed to magnetize every person in his orbit. It wasn't long before he became a rising star in his chosen field, a savvy entrepreneur with a knack for turning every business opportunity into a success story. I supported him with every fiber of my being, cherishing the moments when his eyes softened for me, when he'd call me at odd hours just to tell me about his day. I trusted him implicitly, never questioning the sincerity of his affections. But life has a way of revealing hidden truths when you least expect it. The first time I noticed something off was during one of his frequent trips. It was a crisp autumn evening when Andrew returned home later than usual, and as I sat in our living room waiting for him with a quiet worry that I couldn't quite place, I found his phone left open on the kitchen counter. I hesitated for only a moment before glancing at the screen, half curious and half dreading what I might see. There was an exchange of texts that mentioned a quaint cafe in a city far from our own, a message that read, "I can't wait to see you again. I wish these trips were all just business so we could be together." The signature was unmistakable, and a chill ran down my spine as I realized that the sender wasn't a colleague or a business partner. The words, playful yet intimate, echoed in my mind long after I closed his phone and forced myself to brush off the incident as a mistake, a misinterpretation of a private joke, perhaps. In the days that followed, my suspicions grew like creeping vines in the back of my mind. Andrew's business trips, once a benign aspect of his demanding career, began to seem like carefully orchestrated escapes from home. I noticed that he would often return with a new cologne that wasn't his usual scent, subtle changes in his wardrobe that hinted at a tropical warmth rather than the usual sterile air of airport lounges, and an uncharacteristic glow in his eyes when he recounted his travels. When I gently mentioned my observations, he would laugh them off, his smile dismissive, as if my worries were nothing more than the products of a jealous imagination. "You're overthinking it," he would say, placing a tender kiss on my forehead, and for a while, I allowed myself to be lulled back into the comforting familiarity of our shared life. Yet, there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't shake, a quiet, persistent doubt that gnawed at me whenever Andrew spoke of his business meetings. I began to remember the little moments, the soft laughter that seemed to linger in his voice when he recalled a certain memory, the way he hesitated before answering questions about his schedule, and the inexplicable spark that appeared in his eyes when I caught him glancing at an old photograph of two women together. I questioned myself, wondering if I was simply being overly sensitive, but deep down I knew that something was amiss. Late one night, as I lay in bed unable to sleep, my thoughts turned to the past, the way Andrew and I had once promised to share every joy and sorrow, every secret and every dream. It was then that I remembered Clarissa, my childhood best friend, who had been a constant presence in my life since the days of scraped knees and endless summers spent playing in the park. Clarissa and I had always been inseparable, our bond forged in the fires of shared laughter and whispered secrets. I had never imagined that she would become the center of my darkest suspicions, yet now, inexplicably, her name floated in the back of my mind, a ghost of something I couldn't quite place. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon when I decided to check Andrew's travel itinerary on his email, an action I had always considered taboo but felt compelled to take as the seeds of suspicion had finally taken root. As I scrolled through the messages, I found an email that caught my eye. It was a booking confirmation for a luxurious vacation resort in a tropical destination, a place far removed from the usual business hubs he frequented. The subject line read "Escape to Paradise," and the details inside spoke of romantic dinners on the beach, private tours, and evenings under starlit skies. My heart pounded as I absorbed the words, each sentence a stark contrast to the sterile, professional language I had come to expect from his correspondence. Was it possible that these trips were not business trips at all, but secret romantic vacations? And if so, with whom? The answer, I feared, lay in the unlikeliest of places, Clarissa. I recalled a memory from our college days when Andrew had met Clarissa at a mutual friend's party. They had laughed together, shared stories that lingered long into the night, and for a brief, shining moment, there had been a spark that I had dismissed as nothing more than friendly banter. But now, the recollection took on a sinister hue. The clues began to align in a way that I could no longer ignore: the scent of an unfamiliar perfume on Andrew's clothes, the secretive glances exchanged over the phone, and the changes in his behavior that suggested he was living a double life. The possibility that he was involved in something with Clarissa, a woman who had once been my confidant, my anchor in a world that seemed so unpredictable, was too painful to consider. Yet, every piece of evidence seemed to point to that very conclusion. Over the next several days, I embarked on a slow, painful journey of piecing together the truth. I searched through old photographs, revisited memories of shared laughter, and even listened to voicemails that I had once thought were mundane messages about work. Every discovery was a jagged piece of a puzzle that I desperately tried to assemble, even as my heart ached with the knowledge of what it might reveal. I found receipts from tropical getaways that coincided suspiciously with Andrew's business trips, and I discovered that the names of clients in his emails were replaced by playful nicknames that made no sense in a professional context. Each revelation was a small blow, a quiet, insidious reminder that the life I had built with Andrew was built on deception. One evening, unable to bear the weight of the uncertainty any longer, I confronted him. I remember sitting across from him at our dining table, the clatter of cutlery and the low hum of our refrigerator the only sounds in an otherwise heavy silence. My voice trembled as I asked, "Andrew, can you explain why your emails mention vacations, romantic getaways, and someone named Clarissa? Is there something you're not telling me?" His eyes, usually so warm and reassuring, flickered with a mixture of surprise and guarded resignation. For a long, agonizing moment, he said nothing, and the silence between us was filled with unspoken confessions. Finally, he looked away, his jaw set, and said, "I wish I could explain, but it's not that simple." His answer, vague and evasive, only deepened the chasm between us, leaving me drowning in a sea of doubts. In that moment, the image of Clarissa, once a dear friend, transformed into something unrecognizable, the possible lover of the man I had trusted with my heart. The betrayal stung with a ferocity that left me numb. I questioned every memory, every shared smile, and every whispered secret between Andrew and Clarissa, wondering how I had been so blind to the truth that lay hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed lies. As days turned into restless nights, I found myself teetering on the brink of despair. The comfortable rhythms of our life, once a symphony of love and shared dreams, had been replaced by a cacophony of suspicion, betrayal, and heartache. I began to isolate myself, seeking solace in the solitude of our empty apartment while Andrew went off on his business trips. I avoided the mirror, unable to face the reflection of a woman whose eyes betrayed a pain too deep for words. Every object in our home, from the faded couch where we once laughed together to the coffee mug that still held the imprint of his warm hands, became a silent testament to the life I thought I knew, a life now tainted by deceit. In the midst of my internal torment, I turned to the one outlet that had always provided me with a sense of clarity: writing. I began to fill notebooks with the raw, unfiltered emotions that coursed through me: the bitter taste of betrayal, the aching loneliness of suspicion, and the overwhelming desire for answers. My words poured out like a torrent, each sentence a desperate attempt to make sense of a reality that seemed increasingly surreal. I wrote about the nights I spent awake, haunted by images of Andrew's secret smiles and the soft laughter that now echoed in my memories like a cruel joke. I recounted every detail with painstaking precision, determined to capture the truth in black and white, even if that truth threatened to shatter the very foundation of my existence. In those pages, I found a fragile sense of empowerment. Though my heart was heavy with grief, I began to see that acknowledging the truth was the first step toward reclaiming my life. I resolved that I would not let fear and betrayal define me, that I would face the darkness head-on even if it meant unraveling every illusion I had ever held dear. It was a painful realization, one that forced me to question everything about our marriage, our past, and the very nature of trust. Yet, even as the weight of my suspicions threatened to crush me, a small, defiant spark of determination ignited within me, a promise that I would uncover the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. Now, as I stand at the threshold of this new, uncertain reality, I find myself at a crossroads between the life I once knew and a future that remains shrouded in doubt. The business trips that once seemed innocuous have become the catalyst for a profound and heart-wrenching journey, a journey that will force me to confront not only the betrayal of a husband I once adored, but also the painful truth about the bond between Andrew and Clarissa, my childhood best friend. I know that the road ahead will be fraught with tears, anger, and soul-crushing revelations, but I also know that I can no longer live in the shadows of suspicion. As I close this chapter of my reflections, I am left with a haunting certainty. The truth, no matter how painful, must be revealed. My next steps will be fraught with emotional peril, but I must find the courage to face the man I once loved and the friend I once cherished, even if it means shattering the remnants of a life I can no longer recognize. The journey toward understanding begins now, and with every word I write and every question I ask, I inch closer to a truth that promises to redefine everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the fragile boundaries of the heart. In the days following that harrowing discovery, a heavy cloak of uncertainty and despair settled over me. Every morning, I awoke with the taste of betrayal lingering on my tongue and the haunting echo of Andrew's dismissive laughter resonating in my mind. I spent hours pacing the quiet halls of our home, the once familiar sounds now turned into a dissonant symphony of suspicion and heartache. My mind churned relentlessly over every detail, every unexplained phone call, every stray scent of tropical cologne, every furtive smile that I had once dismissed as harmless. Now, those details coalesced into an unbearable weight, a secret truth that threatened to unravel everything I thought I knew about our marriage. I tried to keep myself occupied. I told myself that confronting the truth head-on was the only way to reclaim my sense of self, and so I began a desperate search for answers. Every business trip, every message, every late-night email from Andrew was scrutinized with the precision of a detective determined to piece together a puzzle of lies. I started to maintain a log, a meticulous record of every anomaly in his schedule, every deviation from his usual routine. I would note the times he left for his trips, the dates he returned, and the vague descriptions he offered as reasons for his absences. Over time, a disturbing pattern emerged. The destinations weren't the conventional corporate centers I'd come to expect, but rather exotic locales known more for their idyllic beaches and sultry evenings than for boardroom meetings. One cold evening, as I sat alone at the kitchen table with the soft hum of the refrigerator as my only companion, I dared to open one of Andrew's discarded travel itineraries that I'd found hidden in his briefcase. The document was adorned with glossy photos of sun-drenched beaches and palm trees swaying against a cerulean sky, a stark contrast to the monotonous reports of client visits I had always assumed were mundane details of business. My heart hammered against my chest as I read through the itinerary: romantic dinners on a private terrace, sunset cruises, even a reference to an intimate getaway at a luxury resort. Every word screamed of escapism and desire, not the sterile protocol of a corporate trip. That discovery, coupled with the memory of that incriminating text message, forced me into a grim realization: Andrew's business trips were in fact carefully orchestrated escapes, romantic vacations with none other than Clarissa, my childhood best friend. The very thought was like a poison seeping into every corner of my soul. Clarissa, the one person who had been my unwavering confidant since childhood, had become entwined with the man I vowed to love forever. I felt as if my entire world had tilted on its axis. Everything I had trusted, every memory I had cherished, was suddenly marred by the bitter taste of deception. The pain was multifaceted. There was the raw anguish of betrayal by the man I loved and trusted, but also a deep, gnawing sense of loss at the realization that my lifelong friend had become the keeper of his secrets. In the weeks that followed, I withdrew into a cavern of isolation, spending long hours in the dim light of our study, trying to understand how the threads of my past could be woven so tightly with such a painful present. Every object in our home, the faded sofa where we once shared quiet evenings, the framed photographs of happier times, now served as a reminder of the life that had been built on lies. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed late at night, the silence between me and Andrew stretching out like a chasm filled with every unsaid word and every hidden glance. Desperation gave way to a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. I couldn't let this betrayal define me entirely. I needed to understand why Andrew had chosen to betray me in such a profound way, and I needed to find a path forward through the wreckage of my shattered trust. In a moment of raw determination, I reached out to a close friend, a mutual acquaintance who, I hoped, might shed some light on the situation without betraying my own confidences. Over quiet coffee meetings and hushed phone calls, I learned bits and pieces: whispered rumors that spoke of Andrew's long-standing connection with Clarissa, details of secret rendezvous in far-off resorts, and even hints that the chemistry between them had been evident long before I ever doubted him. Each new piece of information was like another chisel striking at the statue of our once idyllic life, carving away at the facade until nothing remained but the harsh, unvarnished truth. At the same time, I found solace in the pages of my journal. Every day, I poured my heart onto those pages, the quiet despair of waking up alone in our empty apartment, the searing betrayal of knowing that the man I loved had shared secret moments with the person who had once been like a sister to me. I wrote about every emotion in painstaking detail, the anger that made my hands tremble, the deep sadness that left me breathless, and even the small, fleeting moments of clarity that allowed me to see the path forward. In those pages, I began to stitch together a narrative of my own, a story of resilience, of the quiet determination to reclaim my identity from the ruins of deception. I also sought professional help. I scheduled several sessions with a therapist, hoping that an impartial voice could help me navigate the storm of emotions that now raged inside me. In the soft, warm confines of the therapist's office, I found a space where I could finally speak my truth without fear of judgment. I recounted every detail of my discovery, every moment of suspicion that had led me down this painful road. My therapist listened intently, offering gentle guidance and urging me to confront not only the external betrayal but also the inner wounds that it had inflicted. "Your pain is real," he told me in one session, "and it's okay to grieve the loss of the future you thought you had. But remember, this is also an opportunity to redefine what love and trust mean for you, on your own terms." His words resonated with me, and though the journey was far from over, they gave me a glimmer of hope that I could emerge from this darkness with a renewed sense of self. One of the most excruciating challenges was the confrontation with Andrew himself. I had been dreading the moment when I would have to face him, not as the loving husband I once adored, but as the architect of this elaborate web of lies. When I finally mustered the courage to bring up my discoveries, I did so in a quiet, tense evening as we sat down for dinner. The conversation that followed was a turbulent storm of anger, disbelief, and sorrow. Andrew's initial denial gave way to reluctant admissions as the evidence became undeniable. His eyes, once so full of warmth and promise, now shone with a mixture of guilt and resignation. "I never meant to hurt you," he murmured, his voice barely audible as he tried to explain that the trips were simply a part of his work, nothing more, nothing less. But his words rang hollow against the overwhelming truth that I had uncovered. The confrontation left me emotionally drained, a tangle of conflicting emotions that I could neither fully express nor entirely suppress. I remember leaving the table that night with a heavy heart, my mind swirling with questions. How had I missed the signs? Could our love have survived if he had been honest from the start? And most painful of all, how had my dearest friend become entwined in this betrayal? Each question was a reminder of the love I thought I had known, a love now tarnished by secrets and lies. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in our home grew increasingly charged. Andrew's once familiar routine now felt like an elaborate performance, every gesture laced with the weight of guilt. I found myself watching him closely, searching for clues in his every move, while he avoided my gaze as if he knew that in my eyes, the truth was etched for all to see. Our conversations became stilted and filled with awkward pauses. The warm, easy intimacy we had once shared was replaced by an undercurrent of tension, a silent acknowledgement that our marriage had been irrevocably altered. One particularly long afternoon, I ventured into the study, a room that had once been a safe haven of shared laughter and mutual respect. Instead, I discovered it had become a repository of secrets, receipts from tropical getaways, ambiguous emails with playful nicknames, and even photographs of Andrew with Clarissa in places I never imagined. Each item was a shard of the shattered trust that now lay scattered at my feet. I spent hours in that room, the quiet punctuated only by the rustle of papers as I tried to piece together the narrative of Andrew's double life. Every new discovery deepened the wound, yet it also propelled me toward a painful clarity. I needed to reclaim my voice, my story, and my future. My investigation was not without its moments of confrontation with memories of the past. I began to recall the times when Clarissa and I had laughed together, shared secrets beneath the old oak tree in our childhood backyard, and confided in one another as we navigated the complexities of growing up. The thought that she might have become the clandestine lover of the man I had chosen to spend my life with was almost too much to bear. I oscillated between grief for the loss of that innocent bond and a burning need to understand how the tapestry of our shared history had been so treacherously rewoven by betrayal. In the midst of my anguish, I also experienced unexpected moments of introspection and clarity. Late at night, I would sit at the window of our darkened apartment, the city lights shimmering like distant beacons, and allow my mind to wander freely. In those moments, I began to confront the harsh reality that trust, once broken, could never be restored to its original form. But I also began to see that the fragments of my shattered heart might one day be mended into something even more resilient. I wondered if perhaps this betrayal, as excruciating as it was, might serve as a catalyst for personal transformation, a painful, but ultimately liberating, journey toward rediscovering who I truly was beyond the confines of our broken marriage. Driven by a need to understand both Andrew's motives and my own feelings, I began to write a series of letters, never sent, but written solely for my own process of healing. In those letters, I laid bare every thought, every fear, and every ounce of anger that had accumulated over months of silent suffering. I wrote about the lost dreams of a future we had once envisioned together, and the stark realization that the life I thought we were building was nothing more than a house of cards, ready to collapse under the weight of dishonesty. With each letter, I felt a little more of the burden lift, as if by externalizing my pain, I could begin to see a glimmer of a path forward. As the weeks bled into months, I noticed subtle changes in my own demeanor. The raw anguish that had once dominated every waking moment began to recede, replaced slowly by a cautious determination to reclaim my life. I found solace in small rituals, a morning walk in the park, a quiet cup of coffee at a local cafe, even the simple act of reading a book that transported me to another world. These moments of normalcy became tiny anchors, grounding me amidst the storm of my emotions. I began to understand that healing was not a linear process, but rather a series of small, deliberate steps forward, even when every step felt like a battle against my own despair. In one particularly transformative session with my therapist, I was urged to explore the concept of forgiveness, not as a means of excusing Andrew's actions, but as a way to free myself from the relentless grip of bitterness. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, my therapist explained softly, it's about reclaiming your power over the past so that you can live fully in the present. Those words resonated deeply with me, planting a seed of possibility that perhaps, one day, I could let go of the anger that had so long defined my every thought. I realized that holding on to the betrayal was like carrying a heavy stone in my heart, a weight that I no longer needed to bear if I could learn to forgive, not for his sake, but for mine. Encouraged by this newfound perspective, I began to imagine a future where I could rebuild not only my sense of self but also a life filled with genuine, unburdened connection. I started exploring interests that had once brought me joy, taking a photography class, volunteering at a local community center, and even reconnecting with friends I had long since lost touch with. These activities, though small in themselves, slowly began to illuminate the possibility of a life defined by resilience rather than betrayal. Yet, even as I embarked on this path of personal rediscovery, the shadow of Andrew's deceit and Clarissa's involvement loomed large. There were nights when, despite all my efforts, I would lie awake and feel the sting of betrayal as if it were fresh, a sharp pang that reminded me of every secret phone call, every evasive answer, every soft laugh shared in moments I now recognized as lies. I would replay those memories in my mind with an almost unbearable intensity, trying to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the reality that had been forced upon me. The conflict was constant, a war between the hope of reclaiming my future and the lingering pain of a love that had been so profoundly shattered. I began to notice changes in Andrew as well. His once confident demeanor was now marred by a hesitancy that spoke of internal turmoil. He started to avoid certain topics, his eyes darting away when I brought up details of his travels. I sensed that he, too, was caught in the tangled web of guilt and regret. One evening, as I watched him from across the living room while he sat silently with his phone in hand, I wondered if he ever truly understood the depth of the hurt he had caused, not only to me but to the very foundation of our relationship. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken apologies and the unbearable weight of secrets that could no longer be contained. In the midst of this emotional labyrinth, I also had to face the painful reality of how our shared life had become a series of masquerades, each of us hiding behind carefully constructed facades to shield ourselves from further pain. I realized that the time had come to dismantle those facades and embrace the vulnerability that comes with truth. In a moment of quiet resolve, I told Andrew that we needed to consider couples therapy, an attempt to navigate the treacherous waters of betrayal together, to explore whether the fragments of trust could ever be pieced back together. His reluctant nod and the distant look in his eyes were not signs of immediate reconciliation, but they were small steps toward acknowledging that something needed to change. Over the next several weeks, our therapy sessions became both a battleground and a sanctuary. We were forced to confront our deepest fears and the cracks in our marriage that had long been hidden beneath layers of routine and denial. I listened as Andrew spoke haltingly about the allure of the vacations, the magnetic pull of Clarissa's companionship, and the sense of freedom he had felt away from the confines of our everyday life. His confessions were painful, raw admissions of weakness and the allure of a double life that he had justified to himself for far too long. And though his words did little to fill the void of betrayal, they did begin to illuminate the complex interplay of emotions that had driven him to act as he had. In one particularly intense session, I found myself breaking down completely, tears streaming down my face as I recounted every moment of hurt and disbelief. I spoke of the nights I had spent awake, grappling with the realization that my trust had been so deeply violated, and of the overwhelming fear that perhaps I would never be able to trust again. My therapist gently guided me through that storm of emotions, helping me see that while the betrayal was a part of our past, it did not have to define our future. Healing, he said softly, is about taking these shards of pain and, piece by piece, crafting something that reflects not your suffering, but your strength. Those words became a quiet mantra that I clung to, a reminder that every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory over the darkness that had threatened to consume me. Outside the therapy room, I continued to rebuild my world one tentative moment at a time. I reconnected with old friends who had always admired my resilience, and I allowed myself to laugh again, even if the laughter was tinged with a trace of sorrow. I returned to the simple pleasures that had once defined my life, a walk along the river at sunset, the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread, the quiet satisfaction of a day spent immersed in a good book. Each of these moments was a small act of rebellion against the despair that had threatened to define me. I began to see that while the wounds of betrayal might never fully vanish, they could, over time, transform into symbols of survival, a reminder that I had the strength to endure even the most devastating of losses. As spring blossomed fully around me, a tentative peace began to take root in my heart. I no longer viewed my past solely through the lens of pain. Instead, I started to recognize that the journey through betrayal had taught me invaluable lessons about love, trust, and the resilience of the human spirit. I understood that rebuilding a shattered life was not about erasing the scars, but about integrating them into a narrative that celebrated both the pain and the profound strength that had emerged from it. In my journal, I began to write not just about the hurt, but about the possibilities of renewal, a future where honesty and vulnerability could serve as the cornerstones of a more authentic existence. One memorable afternoon, as I sat on a park bench beneath a canopy of budding trees, I felt the quiet warmth of the sun on my face and a sense of clarity that I hadn't experienced in months. In that peaceful moment, I realized that my journey was far from over. It was an evolving tapestry woven from threads of sorrow, anger, hope, and forgiveness. I resolved then to embrace every part of my story, the darkness and the light alike, as essential chapters of who I was. I understood that while Andrew's actions had irrevocably altered the course of our marriage, they had also forced me to confront my own inner strength and redefine what it meant to truly love and be loved. Now, as I write these words with a heart that has been tempered by both betrayal and healing, I look forward to the future with cautious optimism. I know that the road ahead will not be smooth, that there will be days when the shadows of doubt creep in and threaten to undo the progress I have fought so hard to achieve. But I also know that I am no longer the same person who once lived in fear of secrets and lies. I have learned to cherish the moments of truth, to embrace the vulnerability that comes with opening my heart, and to recognize that every ending carries within it the seed of a new beginning. In the quiet hum of my everyday life, amidst the gentle rhythm of days marked by small victories and lingering sorrows, I have come to understand that forgiveness is a journey rather than a destination. I choose to forgive not because I want to forget the pain, but because I refuse to let it imprison my future. Every day, I make a conscious decision to rise above the betrayal, to reclaim my identity from the ruins of deception, and to rebuild a life that honors both the beauty and the hardship of my experiences. As I step forward into the unfolding horizon, I hold close the lessons of this painful chapter, a reminder that even in the midst of profound loss, there remains the possibility of rediscovering who we truly are. I know that the scars of Andrew's secret and the betrayal of my childhood friend will always be a part of my story, but they no longer define me. Instead, they serve as the quiet evidence of my resilience, a testament to the unyielding spirit that carries me onward, one brave, trembling step at a time. In the aftermath of confronting the reality that had unraveled the life I thought I knew, the days that followed were marked by a relentless mix of anguish, confusion, and a raw, unfiltered determination to reclaim my own identity. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever imagined, and for a long while, every step I took felt like walking on shattered glass. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, I gradually began to understand that this painful journey, though it had left scars, could also be the crucible through which I would ultimately rediscover the strength I never knew I possessed. I started each morning with a heavy heart and a mind full of memories. The familiar aroma of brewed coffee and the soft light that filtered through our kitchen window once promised comfort, but now they served as constant reminders of the life that had been built on secrets. Andrew's business trips, which I had long accepted as a necessary part of his career, had been revealed to be a carefully orchestrated escape, a series of romantic vacations with Clarissa, my childhood best friend. That knowledge had shaken me to my core, and I found myself haunted by images of stolen kisses and whispered promises shared in distant, tropical locales. Every night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the evidence over and over in my mind, the unexpected itinerary adorned with pictures of sandy beaches, the playful yet intimate texts that now seemed to glow with forbidden intimacy, and even the subtle changes in Andrew's scent, hints of a cologne that wasn't his own. In those early, sleepless nights, despair threatened to consume me. I'd wander our empty apartment, touching the surfaces of objects that had once been imbued with love, now feeling cold and alien under my fingertips. I remember standing in our living room, staring at a framed photo of Andrew and me from happier times, unable to reconcile the smiling faces with the betrayal that now lay beneath. The juxtaposition was unbearable. On one side, I clung to the memories of tender evenings and soft laughter. On the other, I was forced to confront the harsh reality that those moments had been a facade, a beautiful lie hiding a darker truth. As the days passed, however, the initial shock began to give way to a determined introspection. I started by acknowledging the pain that had lodged itself in every corner of my being. I poured my anguish into my journal with an intensity one hadn't known before, allowing each word to serve as both catharsis and a step toward clarity. I wrote about the betrayal not just as a narrative of deceit but as a personal reckoning, a painful journey into the depths of trust, vulnerability, and the complexity of love. I questioned everything. Was our love ever genuine if it could be so easily undermined by secrecy? Had I ignored the signs out of a desperate need to believe in a perfect future? And perhaps most agonizing of all, could I ever rebuild a foundation strong enough to hold the weight of a love so tarnished by lies? In my journal, I also chronicled the slow evolution of my own self-awareness. I began to see that the betrayal, as excruciating as it was, forced me to confront the parts of myself that I had long neglected, my doubts, my fears, and even my own tendencies to trust too easily. I was forced to ask hard questions about the nature of fidelity and the boundaries of intimacy. I wondered whether the failure had been solely Andrew's, or if there was something in the dynamics of our relationship that had allowed his secret world to flourish unchecked. The more I wrote, the more I realized that, ultimately, the journey toward healing was one of reclaiming my own power, a power that lay in facing the truth, however bitter, and choosing to define my future on my own terms. One pivotal afternoon, as the gray light of winter began to soften into the promise of an early spring, I decided that I could no longer remain a passive victim in this narrative. I reached out to Clarissa. For years, she had been the silent partner in my life, a friend whose presence had once been a comforting constant through the ups and downs of childhood. I had never suspected her of harboring a secret so entwined with my own pain. With trembling hands, I drafted a message, my heart pounding as I typed, "We need to talk. I have questions that only you can answer." Sending that message felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory, but I knew it was a step I had to take if I were ever to understand the full scope of this betrayal. The conversation with Clarissa was as unexpected as it was emotionally charged. We met in a small, quiet cafe on a rainy afternoon, a setting that seemed to mirror the heaviness in my heart. I could see the worry in her eyes the moment she spotted me, a reflection of the guilt and sorrow that had clearly been gnawing at her for some time. As we sat down, the clamor of everyday life around us faded into a muted background, and for a while, it was just the two of us facing the truth. "Why, Clarissa?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, yet heavy with all the questions I'd harbored. "How did it come to this? How could you and Andrew?" Her eyes filled with tears as she reached for a tissue. "I never wanted to hurt you," she began, her voice trembling. "It started innocently enough, as you know. Andrew and I, there was always a connection between us, a spark that I tried so hard to ignore because I valued our friendship with you above all. But over time, that spark grew into something I couldn't control. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to become what it did. I was confused, and I made terrible decisions." Her confession was a mixture of remorse and desperation. I could sense that she was caught in a web of her own making, a web spun by shared secrets, long-suppressed feelings, and the pressure to conform to an image of perfection that had been instilled in us since childhood. Clarissa admitted that there had been moments when she longed for something more than just friendship, moments when the closeness between her and Andrew took on a dimension that was far too intimate for platonic affection. "I thought I could keep it hidden," she continued, her voice breaking, "that I could manage the situation without anyone getting hurt. But the truth, it was always there, lurking in the background. The weight of her words hit me with a force that left me momentarily speechless. I was torn between the betrayal I felt and the sorrow for the friend I had once cherished. In that quiet cafe, as the rain tapped steadily against the windows, I realized that the truth was far more complicated than a simple matter of infidelity. It was a confluence of long-held secrets, unmet emotional needs, and the painful realities of growing up in an environment where love was conditional and often manipulated. After our conversation, I left the cafe feeling a profound mix of grief and clarity. Clarissa's confession did little to ease the sting of betrayal, but it did force me to confront the complex interplay of emotions that had defined our relationships over the years. I returned home with a heavy heart, determined to face Andrew and to seek a resolution, whether that meant salvaging what remained of our marriage or forging a new path entirely on my own. The next confrontation with Andrew was a turning point. One cool, clear evening, I sat him down in our living room, the familiar hum of the air conditioner the only sound in the room as I gathered my resolve. "Andrew," I said, my voice steady but filled with raw emotion, "I need to know if there's any truth left in what you say about those trips. Is there anything you haven't told me? Do you still care about what we had?" He looked at me, his eyes haunted by the weight of his own guilt and regret. For a long moment, the silence stretched between us, heavy with everything unsaid. Then he spoke in a low, defeated tone. "I made a terrible mistake," he admitted. "I let my desires and my insecurities drive me to do something that I can't justify. I betrayed you, and I betrayed our marriage. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. All I can do now is try to make amends, if you can ever find it in your heart to forgive me." His words, though laced with regret, did little to mend the rift in my heart. I felt a tumult of emotions, anger, sadness, and a deep-seated sense of loss that seemed to echo every memory of our once perfect life. But even in that darkness, I sensed a glimmer of possibility. Andrew's admission, raw and unvarnished, was the first step toward acknowledging the pain he had inflicted. It was not an apology that erased the past, but it was an opening, a door through which the possibility of healing might one day enter. In the weeks that followed, I immersed myself in the painstaking work of rebuilding. I attended therapy sessions not only alone but also with Andrew, though our joint sessions were fraught with tension and moments when words failed us. Each session was a battleground where we both laid bare our vulnerabilities and began to sift through the rubble of our broken trust. I learned that healing was not a linear process, but a series of small, deliberate steps, each one an act of defiance against the bitterness that threatened to consume us. Outside the confines of our troubled home, I slowly began to reassemble the pieces of my own identity. I returned to old hobbies that had once brought me joy, long walks through the park, photography excursions that allowed me to capture the fleeting beauty of a sunrise, and evenings spent reading in a quiet corner of our local library. I rediscovered the power of solitude, not as a refuge from pain, but as a space in which I could rebuild myself piece by fragile piece. Every new discovery was a small act of reclamation, a quiet reminder that I was still here, still capable of creating beauty even after the darkest storm. One day, as I was reviewing the photographs from one of my morning walks, I realized that despite the betrayal and the heartache, life continued to unfold in unpredictable and wondrous ways. The lens of my camera captured not just the stark realities of an overcast sky, but also the soft hues of hope that broke through the gray. In those images, I saw reflections of my own journey, a tapestry woven from threads of pain and light, sorrow and renewal. It was in that moment that I began to understand that while the scars of betrayal might never fully fade, they could become symbols of resilience, a testament to the indomitable spirit that had carried me through the storm. Slowly, I started to rebuild not just my sense of self but also a tentative new relationship with Andrew. It wasn't the same as it had been before, the wounds were too deep for the old intimacy to return in its previous form. But in our shared moments, quiet dinners with minimal conversation, gentle exchanges of small, meaningful gestures, I sensed the possibility of a future where honesty and vulnerability could coexist with forgiveness. We began to navigate the delicate dance of reconciliation, acknowledging that the path forward would be long and fraught with setbacks. Yet, every day, as we sat together in the soft glow of the evening light, I could see that we were both trying, however imperfectly, to rebuild the trust that had been so brutally shattered. One crisp spring afternoon, several months after that fateful confrontation, I decided it was time to take one more step toward closure. I organized a small gathering with a few close friends, a group of people who had seen me at my lowest and had helped me to see the potential for renewal even in the face of profound betrayal. We met at a quiet lakeside retreat, where the water shimmered under the clear blue sky and the gentle rustle of leaves provided a natural, calming symphony. In that serene setting, surrounded by those who cared about me, I read aloud a passage from my journal, a passage that encapsulated my journey through pain and the slow, painful ascent toward healing. With each word, I felt a cathartic release, as if the act of sharing my story was a way to honor the darkness while also welcoming the light. That day, I vowed that I would no longer allow the betrayal to dictate the terms of my life. I would continue to forge a future defined by truth, resilience, and a renewed sense of self-worth. Now, as I sit at my desk writing these words, I feel a cautious optimism blossoming within me. The scars of the past remain indelible, etched into the fabric of my being, but they no longer serve as shackles that bind me to a history of pain. Instead, they are the silent markers of a journey that has led me to a place of self-discovery and renewal. I have learned that forgiveness is not a single act, but an ongoing process, a deliberate choice made each day to let go of bitterness and to embrace the possibility of a brighter tomorrow. I know that the road ahead will still be riddled with challenges, the occasional resurgence of doubt, moments when the memories of stolen kisses and secret vacations threaten to unravel my hard-won progress. But I also know that I am stronger than I ever imagined, that even in the wake of betrayal, there exists the possibility of rebuilding, of finding a deeper, more authentic form of love and trust. I am determined to continue writing my story, not as a tale of defeat, but as a testament to the resilience of the human heart, capable of healing and transforming even the most painful experiences into sources of strength. As I reflect on the journey that has brought me to this fragile yet hopeful present, I am filled with gratitude for the lessons learned along the way. I am grateful for the moments of raw, unfiltered truth that forced me to confront my deepest fears, and for the gentle support of friends, therapists, and even the quiet strength of solitude. I have come to understand that while the pain of betrayal may never entirely vanish, it can be transformed into a force that propels us forward, a reminder that we are capable of rising again after every fall. Today, I choose to believe in the possibility of a future built on genuine honesty and compassionate understanding. I choose to view my scars not as symbols of a broken past, but as emblems of the endurance and transformation that have allowed me to emerge from darkness into light. I am writing a new chapter of my life, one defined not by the secrets that once shattered my trust, but by the promise of hope and the relentless determination to create a future where love is nurtured by truth. As I close this part of my story, I step forward with a heart that, while still tender from the wounds of yesterday, beats with the steady rhythm of a man who has discovered that even in the midst of betrayal, there is a path to healing, a path illuminated by the soft glow of forgiveness, the enduring strength of self-respect, and the promise that every ending is, in fact, the beginning of something new.